This video is brought to you as a free public service courtesy of a 3-year collaboration between Armory Center for the Arts and Pasadena Unified School District. Made possible by a grant from the U.S. Department of Education with additional support from the Clarence E. Heller Charitable Foundation. Artful Connections with Math has been formally evaluated by CREST, the National Center for Research on Evaluation, Standards, and Student Testing at the University of California, Los Angeles. For more Artful Connections with Math video lessons, or to learn more about professional development opportunities through Armory Center for the Arts, visit armoryarts.org/math. Thank you. Welcome to Artful Connections with Math, Area Perimeter Blueprint Collage. How do we use math and art to represent our living spaces? This lesson's goal is for students to create a floor plan collage, using graph paper to calculate area and sewing with embroidery floss to calculate perimeter. Over the course of this lesson that we have broken down into 2 90-minute sessions, your third grade students will be able to calculate the area and perimeter of their design, sew with embroidery floss, and create a collage drawing that represents a living space. This lesson addresses a number of Common Core standards for mathematics and California Visual Arts content standards. Visit armoryarts.org/AP1 to download a PDF of this entire lesson plan that outlines the standards addressed, plus key vocabulary words, rubrics, and ideas for accommodations, variations, and extensions not covered in this video. For this lesson, you'll need graph paper with 1-inch squares, scissors, colored construction paper, either 9x12 or 12x18, glue sticks, embroidery needles, embroidery floss, colored pencils and/or pastels, and collage material. Preparation for this lesson is simple. Collage material can be taken from furniture magazines or simply print out a Google image search of various furniture items. If necessary, thread needles before the lesson. Otherwise, you can teach your students how to thread their own needles. If you're using a chart paper size pad of graph paper, cut down the paper to the size of the construction paper you're using. Before we dive into session 1, let's review plane shapes and their attributes. In pairs, give your students 8 square attribute blocks and have them create a rectangle with their blocks. Now, tell everyone that each side of the square block is 1 inch. Ask the class for ideas about how we can measure the distance around this 2-dimensional shape. Have your pairs work together and come up with a measurement for the distance around the rectangle. Then, share out how they arrived at their answer. Explain to everyone that the measurement around the shape is called the perimeter. To find the perimeter, all you do is add up the length of all the sides of the plane shape. The amount of space inside the boundary of a flat 2-dimensional object is called the area of that shape. Pick up a square attribute block and point to the space inside. Explain to your students that this is the area of this 1 square. For this 1 square, the area is 1 square inch. Now, ask everyone, what is the area of your rectangle? They should talk with their partner and explain their thinking to each other. Now, have pairs create a different plane shape of their choosing using all their squares. Please note that all squares must touch at least on one side. Ask your students to trace their shape on a piece of paper. Next, have students figure out the perimeter and the area of their shape. Ask them if either measurement changed when the squares were formed into a rectangle. If there's time, give your students 2 more squares and ask them to predict how the perimeter and area will change when they add 2 squares to the existing plane shape. If you don't have attribute blocks, this activity can also be done on 1-inch graph paper. Have students trace rectangles, cut them out, and paste them in their journals next to their perimeter and area calculations. Before we begin, let's access prior knowledge with the students. Ask your students questions like, what do you know about perimeter? What do you know about sewing? Describe your dream house. Show students the art images included in this lesson plan. Visit armoryarts.org/AP1 to download a PDF version of this lesson plan. Show students the 2 floor plan images and ask questions like, what do you notice? What rooms can you notice? How do the shapes of the floor plans differ? How would you calculate the area of this floor plan? How would you calculate the perimeter? What do you notice about the way the perimeter of this floor plan is drawn? Show students the Hagar Warmerdam van Heumeman image and ask the following questions. What do you notice? How would you calculate the perimeter of the door? Does the embroidery on the staircase show perimeter? Have your students draw the shape of their dream house on graph paper. If you want, you can ask them to create a shape that includes only whole squares, so they will only have to calculate whole units. Or, to make the total area more challenging to calculate, you can allow students to create diagonal lines through squares so they will have to calculate half units. When completed, cut out the dream house shape from the graph paper and glue it onto the construction paper. Have your students calculate the perimeter of their dream house shape by writing a number next to each box as they count, or by counting the number of boxes on one side and then writing the total length for each side. Tell everyone to poke a hole at the corner of each graph paper square using an embroidery needle. Then, they can choose any embroidery floss color they want and start weaving through each hole. Remind your students that the thread will only appear on every other square. To avoid working with excessively long string, students may have to rethread their needles several times. When they come to the end of their embroidery floss, students should tape it to the construction paper on the side where the graph paper is glued. If desired, students could tie a knot instead and then cut off the excess string. Now, choose another color of embroidery floss. Weave through the perimeter again, filling in every other space. Just before this session ends, have everyone stop working and look at each other's floor plans. Ask your students, in what ways are the shapes of everyone's floor plans different? How are they the same? How did you decide what shape to make your floor plan? What did you learn about weaving and using embroidery floss? Which floor plan has the greatest perimeter? And which floor plan has the least perimeter? We're almost done with our dream home blueprint, but first, let's review what we did last session. Ask your students to describe what they did last session, and ask them what they know about area, and ask them what they know about collage. Show students art images from Richard Hamilton included in this lesson plan. Visit armoryarts.org/AP1 to download a PDF of this entire lesson plan. Ask everyone the following questions. What do you notice? What media did the artist use to create this work? What do you notice about color? What pieces of collage do you notice? Which parts of the space seem to be closest to you? Which ones are furthest away? Why do you think the artist placed his collage pieces where he did? Tell your students to calculate their floor plan's area. Count each square on their graph paper, writing a number in each square as they count. Using old magazines or similar items, cut out household images like rugs, fireplaces, dining tables, sofas, refrigerators, showers, sinks, and more. Tell your students that the word collage comes from the French word that means to glue. Collage is a two-dimensional artwork made from assembling and gluing different things like newspaper clippings, ribbons, bits of papers, photographs, and other found objects. Explain to your class the process for cutting and pasting the shapes and the decision-making process about placement and overlapping. Now, they can design the layout of their dream house. Instruct your students to turn the paper to the side without the graph paper and glue these household images inside the embroidery floss. Finally, your students can use colored pencils or oil pastels to create other household items and fill in backgrounds. If there's time, they can also create a landscape on the construction paper surrounding the floor plan. The day after session 2, review what everyone has learned about perimeter and area. Ask your class to explain what's the difference between perimeter and area. Have them draw a picture and explain. Then, Give your students 7 square attribute blocks and have them design and trace a plane shape in their art journals. Using pictures and words, have your students calculate the perimeter and area of their shape. Then, have each student speak to at least 2 classmates and explain how they arrived at their answer. Also, have students draw rectangles in their journals and assign a length to one side and a width to the other side. Ask students to calculate the perimeter by deducting the length and width of the 2 unknown sides, using their knowledge of the properties of rectangles. Thanks for joining us today. To download a PDF version of this entire lesson plan, visit armoryarts.org/AP1. To make more artful connections with math, visit armoryarts.org/math. Thank you.